So we're now recording and I am admitting everyone from the lobby in.
Tell me when you're ready.
Here we go.
We are ready to go.
Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Northern Beaches Local Planning Panel on the 6th of September 2023. My name is Peter Biscoe and I'm the chair of the panel. With me today on the panel are Julie Walsh and Heather Wharton, expert members of the panel, and Frank Bush, the community representative. The procedure is that you can assume that the panel has read all the written submissions. There are a number of registered speakers. The usual procedure is for speakers to limit themselves to 3 minutes. If more time is required, then on application to me as the chair, time can be extended. There's no need to repeat what other speakers have said. If in fact you're in agreement with them, you can indicate your agreement. And it would be appreciated if speakers could be succinct and to the point, and bearing in mind we have read your written submissions. At the end of the meeting, the public meeting, the panel will retire into closed session to consider their each of the matters at the public meeting and also the non-public meeting items. It's usual for the panel to reach a decision on the same day and to publish its minutes, including its reasoning, within 24 hours. Today, there are 4 public meeting items and 3 non-public meeting items. I will identify all of them for the sake of completeness, and they will be the ones that, that the panel will go on to consider. The reason that there are some non-public meeting items, as is referred to in the agenda, is that there is a statutory direction by the Minister for Planning which states that the panel is only required to hold a public meeting where the development application has attracted 10 or more unique submissions by way of objections. So the non-public meeting items, which I'll refer to in a moment, do not satisfy that criterion. So before I then identify each of the matters which we will be dealing with today, the panel acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands in which we gather and pays respects to the elders past and present. There have been declarations of interest completed in writing by each member of the panel. One of the members of the panel, Mr. Bush, the community representative, has declared a conflict of interest in relation to item 4.1 on the agenda and accordingly will be recusing himself from participating in any way in that matter. The 4 public meeting items are as follows. Item 4.1 on the agenda, DA 2022/2234, concerning 19 Morella Road, Whale Beach. This is an application for demolition works and construction of a dwelling house, including a swimming pool and garage. Item 4.2, DA 2023/0172, concerning 1 Gladys Avenue, Frenchs Forest, for demolition works and construction of a multi-dwelling housing development comprising of 30 townhouses and basement car parking. Agenda item 4.3, this is a modification application 2022/0660 relating to 911 Victoria Parade, Manly. This is a modification application of a development consent DA 2022, I think it is, no, DA 220/2013, granted for demolition of existing structures and construction of a mixed-use development and strata subdivision. And the final public meeting item is item 4.4 on the agenda, DA 2023/0127, concerning 6 Namona Street, North Narrabeen. This is designated development. It's for alterations and additions to an educational establishment, being the Narrabeen North Public School, including the removal and replacement of trees, landscaping works and the installation of a substation and fire hydrant booster. As I indicated earlier, I will, for completeness, identify the non-public meeting items, of which there are 3, which the panel will also consider when we move into closed session. The first one is item 5.1 on the agenda, DA 2023/0296, concerning 261 Alfred Street, Cromer, for demolition work, subdivision of one lot into two lots and construction of a driveway. Item 5.2, DA 2023/0212, concerning 13 Green Street, Brookvale, for alterations and additions to an existing industrial building to create rooftop car parking. And finally, item 5.3 on the agenda, DA 2023/0770, relating to 23 Tayuai Road, North Narrabeen, the subdivision of one lot into two. I'll call item 4.1 on the agenda in just a second, and in the meantime, I'll invite Frank Bush to recuse himself from this meeting for the reasons I've earlier indicated. Right, so I think he has now left the meeting. I move on to item 4.1, which, as I have said, is DA 2022/2234, concerning 19 Morella Road, Whale Beach, for demolition works and construction of a dwelling house, including a swimming pool and garage. And we have registered to speak in relation to that matter 4 objectors and 2 speakers for the applicant. The objectors, in order of, I have them on the list in front of me, Jeremy Cleaver of 206 Whale Beach Road, Tony Moody of Tony Moody Planning, Nicola Michelle speaking on behalf of her parents who own 17 Morella Road, Whale Beach, and Rosemary Christie of 21 Morella Road, Whale Beach. Mr. Cleaver, would you like to address the panel?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair and panel members. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to this item. My partner and I own and live at 206 Whale Beach Road, which is immediately to the rear and east of the application site. We really appreciate the panel making a property inspection or a site inspection to the property before this meeting. We would be significantly impacted by the proposed development, as detailed in our written submissions to Council and to the panel prepared on our behalf by Planning Progress. We have very material concerns that the assessment report has accepted a significant breach to the maximum height of the buildings and building envelope that will cause unreasonable harm to, number 1, our amenity, number 2, the amenity of neighbouring occupiers, and number 3, the visual quality of the surrounding environment. In summary, our concerns are as follows: the significant loss of visual and acoustic privacy, the undercroft level and inclusion of 3 levels of living space with balconies and terraces directly oriented towards our rear private amenity space and principal living area will devoid our privacy. Privacy screens will not mitigate these impacts. It's the non-compliant height, building envelope and overdevelopment of the site which gives rise to the unreasonable impacts on amenity and warrants refusal of the DA. The excessive scale at the terrace at level 1 will be wholly intrusive and enable excessive acoustic impacts to arise from everyday living. Our private amenity space, office from where each of us work from home, and back bedroom are in close proximity to the site boundary. This impact could be mitigated by reducing the size of the terrace by conditioning 1 metre wide planter boxes within the eastern edge of the terrace area. This would not overcome the impact, but at least would reduce some degree of harm. The proposed development will appear as a 4-storey structure when viewed from our rear amenity space. Our outlook will be shown as on drawing number A2.003 eastern elevation and annotated photos at attachment 1 of our written submission. As you'll see, the visual build form is 4 stories and the true degree of the building envelope breach is all built form over and above the lower building envelope. See drawing number A2.102. The bulk and scale of the building is excessive on this site, which is in close proximity to our home. The result is an overbearing structure which would overdominate our indoor and outdoor living spaces. The 42.4% breach in the maximum height of buildings. Could I ask everybody to put themselves on mute? I apologise, it's just there's a lot of feedback. The 42.4% breach in the maximum height of the buildings enables a 12.1 metre facade at the eastern elevation, which would dominate our outlook. It's requested that the panel refuse the DA for the reasons set out in the objection letters and written submission. Should the panel consider the approving...
Excuse me for just a moment. Maurice, who I see as a guest, could you put yours onto mute, please? Thank you. Yes, please proceed, Mr. Cleaver. Put yours onto mute, please. Thank you.
Sorry, I think maybe Tony Moody, if you could also put yours on mute. All right, thank you. Should the panel consider approving the proposed development despite the clear impacts raised, it's requested that additional conditions include a 1 metre planter box. Gosh. My apologies, Chairman. It's very hard to.
Yes, no, I see you having
hear.
difficulties here.
It may be possible for you to put people on mute as chair.
Heidi, can you do that?
I will do that now.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you very much. Should the panel consider approving the proposed development despite the clear impacts raised, it's requested that additional conditions, including a 1 metre planter box within the eastern edge of the terrace at level 1, inclusion of 206 Whale Beach Road in condition 24, which requires dilapidation reporting, and retention of palms along the access handle. All the technical details of the impacts are in our written submissions. If the panel should have any queries, please could I ask that they be limited to my capacity as an owner-occupier, and any technical planning matters make reference to the written submissions. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. Does the panel have any questions for Mr. Cleaver? No. Well, thank you very much. We'll then move on to the next one of the registered objectors, Tony Moody of Tony Moody Planning. Mr. Moody, would you like to address the panel? Mr. Moody, are you there?
I think he's on mute.
Yes, but he should be able to hear us. Oh, can you unmute him, or Heidi, or not?
I am not able to unmute.
Mr. Moody, if you can hear us, please unmute yourself, and we can neither hear nor see you at the moment.
Can you hear? See, it doesn't usually hear.
Mr. Moody, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now hear you, although we can't see you. Would you like to address the panel?
My apologies. Can you hear one without you seeing me?
Mr. Moody, I'm afraid we can't hear you effectively. Mr. Moody, I'm afraid this is holding us up. What I'm going to do is call on the other registered objectors first. If you can sort out the technical problems at your end, that'd be appreciated.
Turn it off, unmuted.
Right, I'll call on Nicola Michelle, speaking on behalf of her parents at 17 Morella Road, Whale Beach. Ms. Michelle, would you like to address the panel?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay. I'd like to thank you as well for giving me the opportunity to address you today regarding the impact of the proposed development at 19 Morella Road. My family has lived at Morella Road for over 50 years, and we've been lucky enough to grow up in this wonderful area. Our house at 17 Morella Road is located on the southern side of the proposed development. I'd like to talk to the impact of the development on our property and those of our neighbours, but also the precedent it sets for the locality generally. I'd also like to stress that our concerns are not about development generally, or the development of 19 Morella in particular, but rather the effect of this particular development. The bulk and the size of the proposed development is our primary concern. It's in significant breach of the maximum height rule for buildings, and given how far it extends into the block, it's far outside the building envelope and existing building line of the other properties. It's also wildly out of keeping with the other houses along Morella Road and in front of the property. With respect to the impact of the proposed development on 17 Morella Road, our property, if it's approved in its current form, it really would be devastating. You've seen the height poles. Thank you for coming and having a look that we erected on our property following the applicant's refusal to erect them. The impact on us will be as follows. In terms of view sharing, it's difficult to understand how this development could be considered to adhere to the principle of view sharing. Our view to the southeast will remain, but our view to the northeast will be seriously impacted by the towering development. On the other hand, the applicant's development will have unobstructed panoramic views, even while it seriously diminishes ours and those of our neighbours on both sides. This can't be considered to be view sharing. Impact on sun and light. The development is a giant box which does not follow the lay of the land, or the fall of the land, I should say, and it'll tower over our house. It extends so far forward that it'll block all views from our middle level and will overshadow us to the extent that all our northern sun and light will be blocked for most of the day, all through the year. And the applicant's own submitted plans show this. So in summary, the development is a breaching development, and significantly so. In addition, it monumentally impacts our property as well as those of our neighbours with respect to view impairment, overshadowing, loss of sun and loss of privacy. We believe it can't be considered as being sensitive to the area or well designed, and nor can it be a desirable precedent for the area. We'd therefore ask that the panel refuse the DA for the reasons set out in the numerous objection letters and written submissions, stipulate that the development be reassessed and lowered in accordance with our submitted legal advice that the current height calculations are flawed and wrong, in fact. In addition to lowering the height, if the development were pushed back to the property's Morella Road boundary, it would come forward far less impact on us, and our neighbours would be far less. If these simple steps were taken, the height was reduced and the property pushed back, there's no reason that the development could not proceed. We're not against development, we are against this one. In fact, we applaud good and sensitive design which respects the topography of the site, the locality and the impact on neighbours, and this development does none of those things. So thank you very much for allowing me to specify those objections. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle. Does the panel have any questions? Right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll move on to the next registered speaker. Well, first of all, is Mr. Moody, are you now with us?
Chair, can you hear me? It's
Yes,
Tony
we
Moody.
can. Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. My apologies. I'm in a difficult area and my lack of technology. Chair and panel members, thank you for your patience and courtesy. My name is Tony Moody. I'm acting on behalf of 17 Morella. The height poles were erected due to the fact that there apparently was not a positive response from the applicant. Can I just say, I consider that the assessment of height of the proposed development is significantly flawed. I was so concerned that I put in a point in submission in my document. And then when the error, in my opinion, was again reiterated in the report before you, I obtained the legal advice of Blake Dyer, solicitor, who I consider to be an eminent practitioner in the Land and Environment Court. It is clearly the case, based on the advice of Blake Dyer, that the calculation is wrong. The proposed development essentially sits on a Besser block walls and foundations of a tiled terrace. It is at that point that the applicant and the report before you claims that the great majority of the proposed development complies with the 8.5. As the panel members clearly know, it's from existing ground level, and based on better and an extrapolation method, the proposed height is 42% higher. And I urge panel members to look at the levels of my client's natural topography immediately adjoining the proposed development. Simply put, the proposed building sits on top of a structure. And I earnestly request the panel members to view the legal advice of Blake Dyer. It is Blake Dyer's strong opinion that the clause 4.6 is legally flawed and there's no power to approve. Furthermore, there is significant adverse visual impact when standing in my client's rear yard. They are looking at a building which is predominantly 42%, up to 42% greater. It is not correct, as the clause 4.6 request states that it is only over 1 or 4%. Furthermore, there are additional adverse impacts in addition to visual impact. View loss. My clients will lose the views of the northern headland. The justification for this is on the basis that the water views are maintained. But as you are all well aware, Tenacity states that land and water interface views are far more important than that of water views. Other adjoining properties will lose views of the southern headland. In contrast, the proposed development, by extending deep into the site and having a height up to 42% greater than the height of building standard, will block those headland views. With respect, panel members, that is not view sharing. The existing dwellings in that vicinity have a consistent rear setback line, except for one example, and they are consistent with the principle of view sharing. There is also privacy impacts, which I must concede can be resolved by conditions. There is also overshadowing impacts. Panel members, this is in a sensitive location. There are other design options. It would be a most undesirable precedent based on the Supreme Court decision in Golden for a development to be approved in its current excessive height, bulk, and scale. The sensitive nature of this locality and its high amenity will be compromised from my client's property and other adjoining properties. There are alternative options, panel members, and I urge you not to approve the current proposed development. Again, my thanks to all of you for your patience and courtesy.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Does the panel have any questions?
No.
Just one question from me, Mr. Moody. On your point about whether it's correct to measure from the tiled terrace, doesn't the Merman case support the view that it is?
No, I would say that the case is clearly that where there are levels of adjoining properties showing the natural topography, that the height should be measured from the levels extrapolated at the adjoining property boundaries. That is my understanding.
Right, thank you. And second question is, in terms, you made reference to your client's height poles. Have you seen the height poles erected by the applicant?
Yes, I have. I should acknowledge that those height poles erected by my clients obviously don't take into consideration the side setbacks of the current proposal, and that's as a consequence of the fact that height poles were not erected on the developer site. My impression of those height poles just reaffirm that the excessive height relative to the levels of my client's property is very, very significant. And when viewed from a person standing in the rear yard and on the rear deck, there will be a significant adverse visual impact. I urge, by the way, panel members to look at the aerial photographs, which evidence the prevailing rear setback line. Now, the applicant will say to you, well, we can easily comply with the rear setback control, but as you're all aware, that's a minimum standard. So you have a much higher building extending deep into the block. There are design options, panel members. This can be a redesign, provided it pushes back further, closer to the street. It's a very undesirable precedent, panel members, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. Well, then, I think there being no other questions of Mr. Moody, we'll move on to the final objector who's registered to speak, and that is Rosemary Christie, 21 Morella Road, Whale Beach. Ms. Christie, would you like to address the panel?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Council has development requirements and standards that should be applied as they're fair and reasonable to all parties. As stated by Council, the building height is up to 42.4% non-compliant. The Council's assessment and the applicant's written submission only discusses the overdevelopment and bulk from the eastern or rear of the property, but not from the northern aspect. This non-compliance is not limited only to the column and roof ridge at the rear of the building. It's also on the northern and southern aspects. This is clearly shown in the Council's northern elevation diagram, green zone, page 41 in the assessment report, and my diagram that superimposes the true ground level onto the amended plans. This amount and scale of non-compliant building height is not minor. The height poles show unambiguously the bulk and height of the overdevelopment, and this is not fair nor reasonable. The northern side of the property, where the easement is, has had no previous excavation nor historical development. It is just the natural slope that falls to the north. That this is somehow not the true ground level is false. A false claim that the ground level has been previously excavated here has been used to justify not complying to the 8.5 metre building height. The 10 metre height zone, that is to allow for topographical variation, is to allow for that topographical variation. It's not to go over 12 metres in height. In regards to the stormwater easement, the plans state the connection to the existing stormwater pipework within the easement is to remain, and yet 60% of the uphill easement adjacent to our property is being excavated or altered. The remaining 40% of the attachment is being dug up for new planting or paving. So where will my access be? It'll be all underneath this and it'll be broken up. The proposal is understandably not using the old existing pipework. I need a patent access to the stormwater pit from our property. The 4 metre high retaining wall on the boundary, there is no condition by council for the applicant's geotechnical structural engineer to notify me as to the final design of the wall once the soil analysis is done, so my engineer can review this. After all, a 4 metre high retaining wall is a mighty high wall to be backfilled and not require a void behind it. I welcome that the trees will now reach a mature height of no greater than 8 metres to allow view sharing. This is a result that is both fair and reasonable to all parties. However, the landscaping plan has not been revised and still shows the 7 banksia and 1 palm that will reach 10 metres on maturity. The applicant may argue that our property at 21 Morella Road is taller than 8.5 metres, which may be so, although the upper storey was added 32 years ago and was compliant then. However, it did not go beyond its pre-existing footprint or building line. It did not reduce access to light nor overshadow the adjacent properties, and it did not disrupt their views. I would argue that this is fair and reasonable. I ask the panel to reject the development application as it is unjustifiably non-compliant and it is not fair nor reasonable. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms Christie. Does the panel have any questions of Ms Christie?
No, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I just ask you to clarify for a moment, Ms Christie, you're
Yes.
referring to the trees on your boundary or where the bamboo now is, and you were commenting upon the landscape plan of the applicant.
Yes, it's
Could you just clarify that? I didn't quite follow you there.
where the building goes to 60% from the roadside, that's being dug up for retaining walls and terracing there and for the building. So that access for the upper part, the 60%, it will be certainly disrupted. The lower 40%, which is also where because at the moment the access is further down, that's going to be dug up by the planting for the trees. That's from the lower 40%, and that will cover the old pit that's there. So on the plans, it looks as if it just says adjoins to the old stormwater piping, but that's not being used by the new development. They're obviously putting in their new stormwater, and my view will be that will certainly be disrupted if not destroyed. So I need access to the pit that's going to be placed further down near the adjoining 4 properties because I don't feel that that's going to be at all patent going on the existing stormwater easement at the moment.
Right, thank you. Well, then that concludes, I think, all the registered objectors. There being no further questions of the objectors. We then come to the registered speakers for the applicant, who are George Caravanis of GSA Planning and Anthony Boscovich, the legal representative for the applicant. Mr. Caravanis, would you like to address the panel?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so. Members of the panel, good afternoon. I'm speaking, of course, on behalf of the applicant in support of the application. I've with me the architects as well, Mr. Richard Peters, Tim Hungerford, and Nick Tobias from Tobias Partners, who are available to answer any questions, as well as our client, Michael Reid, who is also available to answer questions. Mr. Boscovich is, of course, going to address after me, and he'll be dealing with matters arising as a result of a clause 4.6. Firstly, members of the panel, I'd like to confirm that we concur with the thorough assessment contained in the council officer's report, and of course the recommendation for approval, as well as the accompanying conditions. We do not wish to challenge any of the recommended conditions of consent. Now, you'll know that the application has been recommended for approval, and that's largely because the building is largely compliant with the council controls. It relates favourably to its neighbours and is consistent with the desired future character of the area. In fact, you'll also see in the council officer's report that it is well beyond the required setback controls. Now, we've all heard about the height breach, and I'd like to talk to that for a moment, if I may. I'll take you to page 20, if I may, of the assessment report, which the assessment officer quotes, and I will quote, "The extent of non-compliance arises from a sharp step in the topography of the site from historical cut and fill." I'll now take you to page 24 of the assessment report, which comprises a list of environmental planning grounds demonstrating the appropriate nature of the height compliance. So in our opinion, it's because of the location of the non-compliance that the current form will not compromise the amenity of the neighbours, nor the streetscape, or indeed the character. In our opinion, the existing ground level has been interpreted correctly. Our clause 4.6 has demonstrated consistency with the relevant objectives, and of course has demonstrated the necessary sufficient environmental planning grounds, which go to topography largely, as well as character. Importantly, the known void at the rear of the existing dwelling on the southeastern side is outside the envelope of the proposed dwelling, and its ground level is irrelevant for the height measurement and the clause 4.6 because it sits outside the proposed dwelling. Furthermore, there's no evidence of any voids or anything under the existing ground line as we have measured in the clause 4.6 as measured by the architects. As indicated, members of the panel, further matters arising from the clause 4.6 will be addressed by Mr. Boscovich. Moving very quickly on to impacts, you'll see on pages 28 to 37 of the assessment report, it contains a detailed view assessment, and it indicates that there will only be a negligible to minor view impact. You'll also see that the shadow cast by the proposed building is reasonable, and the proposal comprises a better than compliant envelope in most cases, and a better impact than what a maximum compliant envelope would have in terms of the solar access of the neighbouring properties. In terms of privacy, this is maintained by separation, landscaping, offsetting of windows, and appropriate screening measures. Now, in response to some of the matters raised by the neighbours, particularly the neighbour to the east, for example, our building is cited twice the required distance from the rear setback. The rear setback requirement is 6.5. Our building's setback 14.6 metres away. So, and indeed, it's the same situation with the side setbacks. The side setbacks are 1 and 2.5 metres, and the proposal is 3 metres away from the sides. So it's behaved well in respect of the controls, and the height breach is a function of the topography. On that basis, members of the panel, we think that the proposal is appropriate for the site and the locality and worthy of approval. And I'd like to hand over to Mr. Boscovich just to add on to some of the clause 4.6 matters.
All right, well, before we move to Mr. Boscovich, does the panel have any questions of Mr. Caravanis?
No.
I had some questions.
Yes, Ms. Walsh.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Caravanis, on page 41 of the report, there's some diagrams and then there's a discussion of the non-compliance with the building envelope control.
Yes.
Do you have that? So do you agree that representation on page 41 you agree with that? The green
Yes.
is there. And then on the next page, there are the objectives of that control.
Yes.
And so one of them is that the bulk and scale of the built form is minimised, and you heard one of the neighbours say that they thought that the building should be shifted closer to the street so it didn't extend beyond the building line of the buildings either side. What's your response to that? That additional building form there that breaches the building envelope control? Why should that be allowed to be approved?
If you look at the, if you were to look at the rear elevation, you'll acknowledge that they represent just the top corners of the building. So it's not the entire roof or the entire elevation of those sides. It's the top corners. So that's not a significant breach. And in terms of the setback, as I indicated, the building is twice the setback required from the rear. So it is significantly setback than what is required by the controls.
So you say the fact that it's set back further from the side is a reason why that would be acceptable?
I'm saying it would be acceptable because the non-compliance is minor. When you look at it from the side elevations, it looks greater. If you were to look at it from the rear, it's just those top corners that exceed the control. It's not the entire building.
Okay. And you're happy with the requirement that the landscaping be species that don't grow above 8 metres in height?
Yes. Yes.
And there were some other suggestions by the neighbours. There was a suggestion that there be a planter box on the terrace on the eastern side, a 1 metre wide planter box to the terrace on the eastern side. Did you have a view on that?
Yeah, given the degree of separation, I mean, again, with a compliant building, you'd have a building that sits 6.5 metres away from that rear dwelling. The proposal is, as I said, twice the distance. So by way of separation alone, that is acceptable. And also the vegetation at the rear could also play some part in that. So I don't think that's necessary.
And just in relation to the landscaping, there were 2 questions I had. One was, it was suggested by one of the neighbours that the palms in the access handle be retained because they do provide some screening. Did you have a view on that?
No, I don't. I mean, as we all know, we cannot rely on landscaping for screening. The assessment report and our assessment has concluded that the separation, the distances, the alignments are all appropriate, and we don't need to rely on landscaping, so we don't need to retain those trees.
Okay, and the other landscaping issue was there's some bamboo on the northern side of the subject site that will be removed, and I think the planting along there was a little bit sparse. Yeah, I guess it's what I'd say. Do you have any view about more substantial landscaping along that boundary?
I don't have a view or instructions, unfortunately. The landscaping regime was undertaken in respect with due consideration to what the building did behind it as well. So we don't need to rely on the landscaping for privacy. It was more in terms of softening the relationship between the buildings.
Okay, thank you. They were my questions.
Yes, thank you. There being no further questions, Mr. Carroll. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Sorry, I did have a question arising from some of the issues that Julie raised. Just regarding the palms, I note your answer, Mr. Karavanis, about them not being needed for screening, but is there some particular reasons why the palms are going to be removed? Because they do contribute a certain landscape character to the location.
I can answer that question after Mr. Boscovich, because I can ask my client, or in fact, I can ask my client to answer that if that's appropriate.
And I guess same goes with the bamboo as well.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you get some instructions on that, Mr. Karavanis, and we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
I think. All right. Well, then, I think that then takes us to Mr. Boscovich. Mr. Boscovich, would you like to address the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Anthony Boscovich. I'm the solicitor assisting the applicant in this matter. I do have instructions on the landscaping in lieu of the bamboo, and the client would be willing to accept conditions of consent to that effect. Just to assisting where I can with that, where there aren't any instructions because we're not together with respect to the matter of the palms, and Mr. Device and Mr. Caravanis will get those instructions. In respect of the 4.6, we commend the 4.6 as amended this morning. That just reflects the amended plans and the overall height. 4.6 is in the form that addresses the necessary tests under both 4.6 of the local LEP as well as those long-standing case principles from case law with respect to the issues that need to arise in a 4.6. It is noted that the 4.6 has been substantially considered by the council, where they provided meaningful and substantive comments at pages 13 in response to objections made by residents adjoining, as well as from page 22 onwards. We were engaged yesterday afternoon to have a look at Mr. Dyer's advice, and that advice has been amplified by Mr. Moody. And we say that the advice that was prepared is based on some unrealistic and unsubstantiated assumptions that just can't be given any weight. And on that basis, weight should be given to the 4.6 and the development approved, or the development be considered for approval, and that the panel consider that they have the power to approve the breach in the height on the basis of a good 4.6 that is accurate. Some of the assumptions made in those letters are confused. In that letter is confusing. They seem to make assumptions that are in conflict, and we would say that on that basis alone, there should be given little or no weight. For instance, the submission made by Maddox yesterday by Mr. Dyer, a long-standing solicitor, someone whom I have some respect for, but who probably hasn't had adequate time to really consider the issues, are problematic. For instance, there's a discussion as to a tank or some type of effluent structure that there's a claim by one of the neighbours exists under the property, whereas Mr. Moody's now claiming that there's some type of other structure below the terrace in lieu of the holding tank. Now, we don't know which it is, and it just seems like this is propagated after the recommendation for approval has been forthcoming from the staff after a very long and comprehensive assessment of the development application of the 4.6, including multiple amendments to try to resolve both objections and issues that the council had. Now, if the objector seeks to propagate these type of issues that they know nothing about, they are purely assumptions that should be given little or no weight. There is a survey, there is information provided. There's been no speculation as to any of these types of facilities, structures or the like on the site for the previous 9 months, and there's no evidence to support it. It is just dirt or mud being thrown to try to facilitate some type of doubt on the part of the panel, and the panel should take on board, consider the 4.6, the SEE, as well as the comprehensive report prepared by council staff over the previous 9 months. Now, with respect to BTAR and the submissions that Mr. Moody has made, as well as Mr. Dyer, the extrapolation of a height in BTAR was from a street for a developed site and not from a side boundary and not from a property adjoining. The proposition that we should be extrapolating a height on our site, which has been developed over the years together with the neighbouring property having been developed from the NGL of the neighbouring property, is obscene. It's just not what BTAR or Stanford or Tony Legg or any of the cases that follow BTAR provide for. Now, Mr. Chair, you raised an issue of Merman, and you quite rightly raised it, although Merman doesn't quite get to the proposition that you sought, but does get to that end point. Merman was a proposition or a case where the same commissioner as in BTAR provided a judgment which is now accepted as good planning principle, that if there's a distortion in land as resulting from a structure that might have pre-existed, that's a good enough environmental planning ground to substantiate the height breach. Now, we say in this case, it doesn't apply. Doesn't apply because there's no structure that might facilitate a height breach more than what we've suggested there is already a height breach. It doesn't, our land height doesn't, it exists at the height that has been assessed, doesn't exist at existing ground level that's any lower than that. So we would say that that's a good question, is one to consider, but one that doesn't apply in this case based on the information you've been provided, based on all the information that we've got and based on all our understanding of the site. Other than that, we rely upon the submissions that we made in a written submission last evening. And if there are any questions associated with what I've just said, or those items in that written submission, we're more than happy to answer them.
Right, thank you, Mr. Bosquist. There's a
Not from me.
No, thanks, Chair.
Mr. Biscoe, you are muted. You have muted yourself.
Just in respect to the palms, Mr. Chair, unless there are questions arising out of the 4.6, we do have instructions. I might ask Mr. Tobias to come on and reflect those instructions.
I can speak to that, Anthony, if that's useful.
I'll ask Mr. Tobias to do that, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, fine.
Unless we're having some technical problems in which we might ask the client, but. Nick, are you?
Yep, no, I'm here. I think I've resolved that. Thank you, panel. Nick Tobias, architect for the applicant. In relation to the bamboo, I think the question was whether the bamboo would be removed, and I think the instructions are that it will be removed. And then we have some instructions in relation to the palm trees. The palm trees we would like to be removed as well. The palm trees are ultimately going to create a view impact for a number of properties, 21, 19 and 17 Morella. They also have the issue of dropping, they drop a lot of fronds on the path, which is an access handle down to the beach. And so the proposal is to replace them with appropriate planting. They're the instructions that I have so far.
Mr. Biscoe, you are still muted. I believe it would be one of the keys on your keyboard that you would need to press.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Right, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. Does the panel have any questions of Mr. Tobias?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Well, then I think that concludes all the registered speakers and all the questions that the panel has. So I thank all the speakers for their succinct submissions and assistance. The panel will now move on to the next item in the agenda, 4.2, and I'll ask the Community Representative Frank Bush to rejoin the panel now, or just wait for him to rejoin us.
I will contact him now. One moment. Frank Bush is now
right.
in the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the panel is all assembled. Now, in relation to this matter, 4.2, there are no registered speakers. So I will therefore move on to 4.3 on the agenda concerning 9 Victoria Parade, Manly, a modification application. We do have 3 registered speakers. There are the objectors, Maurice and Nina Patton, who are residents of Manly. And we have two speakers for the applicant. Are Maurice and Nina Patton with us?
Yes, hello.
Thank you. You might have to speak up a little bit, but would you like to address the panel?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair and panel. Okay, so this is regarding mod 2022-0660. And now this mod is required to be substantially, can you see me and hear me okay?
Thank you. Yes.
It's required to be substantially that of the original application, being DA 2020 2202013, or else be reassessed by council for a new DA. Now, this is almost 10 years old, this original application. The original DA had a solid wall setback of 2.850 metres, plus or minus, from our living room window, as presented to the Land and Environment Court back in 2013. So someone would have presented them with this plan showing that there's almost 3 metres, allowing us to have some light into our living room. The current situation is that the setback to our living room window is only 1.665 metres. That's an increased encroachment of 58% from that original intention of the DA's submission in 2013. Now, a 58% extra encroachment is in no way substantially the same as the 2013 submission. Now, on top of that, of course, the guidelines require a 6 metre setback for the good design guides, but this being 3 metres originally, now being reduced down to 1.6 is really terrible. Now, even to our bedroom, this wall setback of the approved development is 1.965. Now, keep in mind, this was done 2013 prior to the good principles of design came through, and it's just atrocious that it's been allowed to become even closer to our wall. Okay, the second point, and there's 4 of these, is that in the original DA, it had a car park floor level of 1, an RL of 1. The current mod has a car park floor level of RL minus 2.440, not counting the overland stormwater detention to be placed below that. This is an extra 3.44 metres or increase in depth under the ground floor RL of 4.750 metres, or in other words, an extra 192% depth into the soil condition, which was described in the geotech report as being of very high risk and within the unacceptable range. Now, this goes into a water table. 1 metre was its original one, and now it's all the way down well and truly below the water level. Now, this is not substantially the same as the original DA, and in our opinion, cannot be supported. A 1 metre RL keeps it above the water level. This goes well and truly below that. The 192% extra depth below the ground floor level it's just not acceptable, and we don't support this. Okay, the third reason. Now, on our boundary is proposed a new, just 500 metres, our wall is 500 metres from the boundary, is a new access way with entry doorways into retail and commercial space. This was never part or never in the original DA submission. This is a new design. This is a new concept. Now, the impact on our privacy, we're 500 millimetres from this. We're above it, but it's directly below us. Now, how could this possibly be the existing or in any way the DA condition that was approved in 2013? Historically, the entry was from Victoria Parade, which is the correct historic content. And until now, even the previous mod had the access from Victoria Parade. It no longer has that. It has right down the side of our building, right beside our bedroom windows, this new access way. We have no idea what the intended occupant of those areas are. And the amenity to our historic building, our bedrooms, is going to be incredibly impacted, and we do not support this. Okay, so the fourth point being, now we've already gone through the demolition works. Our little old historical building is made of double brick, a very light concrete slab on sand. When the demolition works were occurring, our timber windows shook so much that our windows and timber floor shook so much that we left. We just left and came back after 4:30. It's not a strong building. Number 13 Victoria Parade is a historic building, brittle, and it's going to be subjected to such deep piling. So to help safeguard our home and our well-being, a condition is required to include payment of a trust fund deposit as security against damage to 13 Victoria Parade during the works on site. The amount will be advised by council, would like to be advised by council engineering and quantity surveyor advice. The applicant must bear the cost of all restoration works. Currently, no landowner's consent has been given to the applicant for restraint or anchored retention or any form to our historically brittle old structure, being our home. So no driven piles should be used. The demolition works really shook us up. We had to go during the time. So we don't want to go through any more stress. We have a right to some sort of comfort and amenity in our home. We urge the panel, we urge the council to reconsider any sort of approval for this. And the best case scenario, what we believe should happen, is this design, which has many new implications to it, should be reassessed under a new DA. Thank you. My wife, Nina, would also like to just sort of say something.
And I concur with everything that my husband says, but on your website, the council website, it says that our goal is to protect and enhance our natural and developed environment and to preserve our quality of life for future generations. In my opinion, this development does not adhere to your mission. And it is ugly from a layman's perspective. It is ugly, and it is going to impact the surroundings substantially.
It's 10 metres above the 15-metre height limit. Why do we have historic guidelines when 10 metres above the 15 metres height line? Obviously, the Land and Environment Court allowed this to happen, but they've actually increased that height even further. Now, the 2.7 metre floor to ceiling requirement that's now is due to good design principles. Why are the new design principles not also placed for setbacks? Why can't we have 6 metres tall? Why can't we have more than at least 3 metres? Why are we subjected to 1.6 or 1.7 metres from our living room windows? We had an outlook. We used to look across the historic building, completely taken from us. We had direct sunlight from 3:30 onwards. We would get from 3:30 onwards, sunlight fills our rooms. It's all taken. View corridors have never been considered. So there's a lot to be reconsidered. This is not a good design. If it was to be assessed under current good design principles, the outcome would be very different. We love good new design. This is not one of those.
Thank you. Does the panel have any questions?
I just had a question. What is your address?
It's 13 Victoria Parade, Manly. It's a historic building, and also 11 and 9 were also historic sites. It's a historic site, but number 11, which used to be a beautiful old place, has been demolished. There's only the front part left now, and that was a historic item.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, then, if there are no other questions by the panel, we'll move on to the registered speakers for the applicant, for Alex Kirikos and Frida Blomquist, and I understand Mr. Greg Boston is also available to answer any town planning questions. Mr. Kirikos, would you like to address the panel?
Good afternoon. It's probably best that Frida addresses some of the aspects. I know we support council's recommendation. There are 2 conditions there that our architect, who is going to join us, will probably discuss those 2 issues in context. But the rest of the report we support. We acknowledge the neighbours' advice, but again, we don't agree. This DA has gone through a long process and has been assessed by council, its officers, and a number of consulting parties over quite a long period of time. and ultimately we're satisfied overall with the result. There are two conditions, as I said, that have been imposed currently by council, and I'd just like Frida to address those two conditions on our behalf.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frida.
Okay, so this is Frida Blomquist, the architect of Platform Architects.
That's
Yes, Ms.
correct, yeah.
Blomquist.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, generally, just wanted to say that also we do support the recommendation for approval. Obviously, we have worked very closely with council the last few months to address any issues that they've had, so that we think we have come to a solution that works from balancing both urban design from the street perspective, and to just improve some of the other issues internally that we worked out through with during documentation from our services and structural advice. So generally, otherwise, we think, looking back on what was approved in the LEC, that we think that the footprint of the building is essentially the same. So we haven't reduced any setback to the neighbours of number 13, that we're consistent with that LEC approval. And the conditions that we wanted to talk about today was, unfortunately, our heritage architect wasn't available today, but they are also in agreement with what we're thinking here. So essentially, condition C is talking about the upper floors should be a darker colour, and we think on the basis, the argument is that on the basis that that would be more recessive, but we, and the advice from our heritage architect also is that, in our opinion, the lighter colour scheme that we've proposed here is actually more recessive, and it will make focus more on the lower parts of the building, which is the sort of the brick design. And we would also like to say that the lighter upper floor is consistent with the LEC approval, because that was an off-white proposed on the upper floors, that stage. And so we would like to ask that condition be removed from the, or the proposed condition C to be removed from the list. The other one was condition K, which is also based on a heritage argument that the setback has changed. And in our opinion, the brick bands above, there was a little sort of recessed bit between two brick bands, which we have proposed to have the same brick in this location, and essentially the brick bands.
Which condition are you addressing?
K.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So that's about level 4, and that there's some that the setback has changed. But generally, there was 2 brick bands approved above and below this area, which is the setback that we are now proposing, which is also consistent with the LEC section 34 approved drawings. So essentially all we've done is we've filled in that area. Instead of having cladding between 2 floating brick bands, we've filled it in with brickwork. And as such, we think it should be on the same plane as the brickwork, directly above and below it. So visually, no real change, in our opinion, has, it doesn't affect the bulk of the building at all, because it's within the approved envelope already. Don't know if that was clear. It's a little bit difficult to explain in words, but if you have any questions on that, happy to try to explain it in a better way.
I might be able to expand on that, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Boston.
Yeah, look, thank you for hearing from us today. I can assure you I'm a passenger in the car, I'm not driving. The 2 conditions that were just referenced are actually condition 26, which is council's seeking an amendment to the external finishes. and also an additional condition 43K, which is in relation to the setbacks. Now, the final design and detailing of the modifications occurred through detailed sort of discussion with DSAP. This went to DSAP both as a pre-DA and also through the assessment of the application. We're under the impression that the negotiations that occurred between Jennifer Hill and Council's Heritage Officer had settled the final design detailing, including the materials and finishes. So it comes as a surprise that these two additional conditions are in the recommendation. So we just ask that the panel put their mind towards potentially leaving condition 26 as originally drafted, that is, adopt the proposed colour schedule of colours and finishes, and also not impose condition 43K. In relation to the balance of the issues raised by the neighbours, this is an application seeking the modification of a consent which was granted approximately 10 years ago now. In the final design and construction detailing of this application, consideration had to be given to the new Class 2 building requirements, which are a lot more onerous than they were 10 years ago. And it's those Class 2 provisions relating to BCA requirements and fire egress and buildability, including floor-to-floor heights, have resulted in a vast majority of the modifications that are in this particular application. There's certainly no increase at all in floor space. The only increase in height relates to some mechanical plant going on the roof, which we say is integrated and inconsequential in terms of impacts. In relation to the spatial relationship of the modified proposal to adjoining development, as the assessment report concludes that the spatial relationship as approved by the court is maintained. And I'll note, just for the benefit of the panel, that the reason that the height variation was granted for this particular development originally was to maintain a view corridor the eastern flank of the development site from the properties to the north, up towards St Pat's Cathedral up on the headland. So there was an acceptance that the floor space would be removed from the lower levels of the development, and that is where the building massing as originally approved came from. The original approval, I know the panel doesn't have a full consolidated set of conditions, but I do recall that there are conditions in the original consent for both pre and post dilapidation reporting on all adjoining properties. And to that extent, concerns raised in relation to construction and excavation impacts on neighbours is already appropriately dealt with by way of condition. Apart from that, we're in the panel's hands, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might arise.
Panel have any questions?
Yes, Chair. I just want to clarify, the objector mentioned, so maybe to Mr. Boston, this increased setback that was proposed in the mod. Can you explain where that is and if that's the case, if it's part of this modification?
Yeah, this current modification.
Sorry, that was a question.
No,
sorry.
no, not you.
Sorry,
Please,
sorry. I was taking.
Maurice, this is a question for Mr. Boston.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. Okay.
I was following up on your question.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. Look, my understanding was the modification as originally submitted did propose to extend slightly closer to that eastern boundary. Council requested that building alignment be maintained, and there was an amendment to the plan through the assessment process. And I remind the panel that in terms of the E1 zone in which this site is located, the side boundary setback controls in the DCP are for zero lot line. So in relation to any work that the ADG has to do, it's part 3F relating to privacy. And you'll note in the assessment report that significant time was spent both in relation to Council's assessment planner and also our team in resolving the privacy issues that were raised through the assessment process. So the panel can be satisfied that in relation to part 3F of the ADG, that we satisfy the objectives and therefore the setbacks are acceptable.
And thank you. Similarly, in terms of the issue raised about the extra excavation, the assessment report doesn't. It says like it's 140 millimetres, which is not the understanding of the objector. Do you have any response to that?
Look, I might defer that question to Frida only because I don't have the plans in front of me.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the original DA had a sort of one-level basement with a car stacker pit. However, since then, there's been a modification approving the split-level basement design, which we currently have today with in the latest modification. So that's already approved. So all what we've done is lowering that from the approved basement, 140 millimetres. So that's where the objector, I think, was comparing with the original DA lodged.
And not as modified already.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. And sorry, could I just have a quick question of Maurice in relation to the issues you're raising about the construction? As Mr. Boston's pointed out, there is a condition about dilapidation reports. Can you confirm whether that your property has been inspected for dilapidation, since it would have had to have happened before the demolition, I would assume?
We had a very quick, now this raises a very poignant situation. We did have a very quick inspection from the developer, from the applicant. Some of the tenants didn't get assessed. We weren't satisfied with the level of inspection that occurred. It was very brief. Now, since that point in time, we got our surveyor to make a survey. I looked out my window to see the developer's person removing the survey pin from the sidewalk. I said, hey, can you put that back in? And he did so. About 2 weeks later, I went down to look at the survey pin, which is the boundary we're in discussion, and our survey pin had been painted over. So this is the level of cooperation that we've been gaining. Now, on top of that, we wanted to remediate the wall of our building prior to any sort of construction. The brickwork is, it's a heritage old building and we needed to repair it. Now, the applicant denied our access to that wall and actually constructed a fence, which connected directly into our building. We were actually sitting in our living room, listening to drilling into the brick wall of our building. Yeah, it's just incredible. So please, when you look at the original, overlay it with what's been presented. And for our future amenity and our safety during the course of this, a trust must be put in place so we can be assured we haven't been treated very well. Now, as far as the setback...
Mr. Patton, I think the question was, have you had a dilapidation report carried out?
Yeah, but we're not satisfied with it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Boston, I do have one other question. The objector raised a point about this modification, including a new access into the commercial space. It was said that previously that access was from Victoria Parade. Now it was said under the objector's bedroom window. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, there has been an amendment in terms of the separating the residential and the commercial entry or lobbies. Now that was driven partly by BCA and also partly by DSAP, who requested that ideally those entrances be separated. So there is a entry to part of that commercial floor space via the eastern side boundary of the property, but that's been assessed and considered to be acceptable given the relatively small floor plates associated with those tenancies.
And can I add to that quickly as well? The original approval did have a door there, and also the existing, well, the number 11, which has since been demolished, that commercial building had the main entry off that side passage as well. And we have worked closely with council to try to maintain privacy on that side. We've added a planter and some other details, in addition to also obscure glazing in part to maintain privacy to those residences along that boundary.
Yes, there was also a point made by the objector that the level of excavation and the car park floor level is now below the water level. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. But that is as per the previous approval.
Oh, I see. It's not part of this modification.
No.
Right. Thank you. Does the panel
Apart
have
from
any
the
further?
extra bits that we had increased 140 millimetre to fit mechanical supply air as part of the coordination.
You have increased it 140 mils, is that what you said?
Correct.
Right. Thank you. Does the panel have any further questions?
Not from me.
No, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's Alex Kirikos here. Could I please just address one issue that was raised by our neighbours? I just want to clarify
Yes.
issue in regards to dilapidation reports.
Yeah.
Firstly, we strongly refute what has been said, and I'd like to point out that there has been dilapidation reports completed in accordance with the conditions of consent. Those dilapidation reports were completed by qualified structural engineers, and those reports have been furnished to the various parties as required under the consent. Secondly, I'm not really sure what the neighbours are talking about in regards to survey marks, but there are, and we have had survey of the appropriate boundaries by our registered surveyors on a number of occasions to clearly identify and mark the survey points, and that will continue through any construction process. So I'm not sure what the relevance of that point was. And finally, in regards to access to the side of the building, which the neighbours have requested, we work cooperatively with the neighbours and with their body corporate, and their body corporate independent of individual neighbours, to give them an opportunity for access, which wasn't taken at the time. So I just wanted to clarify those points so that we want to, from a client's perspective, there's been clearly an act of professionalism, cooperation where we can with our neighbours on all three sides of the development site. I just wanted to make sure, and I'd like just to put that on record.
Panel, it's urgent that we address this. It's urgent that we address this, and my wife would like to do so.
I'm the treasurer of Strata Plan 13941. That is a complete the access issue that that man, whatever his name was, that is a complete lie. I have emails that state that we were given access and then taken away. So, and the reason being is that the applicant wants to underpin our building, and they will give us access to remediate our building on the proviso that we give them access to underpin our building. And I have emails to prove that.
Now, also, a quick one about setbacks. If you only have 1.9 metre setback and you take another 300 millimetres away, that's a huge encroachment.
Look, I think we've covered this.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Does the panel have any further questions?
I just had a question of Mr. Kirikos. What when did you do the dilapidation reports? What year?
Prior to demolition, which occurred from memory, and I'm happy to clarify, but I think it was late last year.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, then I think that concludes this agenda item. That being the case, we'll move on now to item 4.4 on the agenda, which is DA 2023/0127 concerning 6 Namona Street North, Narrabeen. These are the alterations and additions to the educational establishment, Narrabeen North Public School. In relation to that matter, there are no objectors registered to speak. There are 2 people for the applicant registered to speak, namely Rob Player, a Director of DFP Planning, and Joel Liddon, Project Director, School Infrastructure. Mr. Player, did you wish to address the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and panel members. I put my name forward to answer any questions. There is a very comprehensive council assessment report which deals with all of the statutory matters as well as the natural and built environmental impacts of the proposal. Being a Crown application, we have also had the benefit of reviewing the 55 draft conditions, and from my point of view, I'm satisfied with the council's assessment report and the recommendation for approval and the conditions that have been put forward as part of that approval. And I'm just happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Yes, thank you. Does the panel have any questions of Mr. Player?
Not from me.
No, thank you.
Me neither, thank you.
Thank you. Then Mr. Liddon, did you wish to address the panel?
Afternoon all. Look, thank you for your time. In the interest of perhaps handing back a few scarce moments to the panel, I was here only to answer specific questions, not around town planning matters, which Mr. Player's addressed, but more about development specific questions around the school. But if there is no questions, I'll gladly cease speaking and let you enjoy your afternoon. But nothing from me specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Liddon?
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
That being the case, that I think then concludes all our public meeting items. The panel will now move into closed session, as I've previously indicated, to consider all these matters, plus the non-public meeting items that I earlier identified. I think it's now almost 1:30. I'll close this meeting and the panel will reconvene at 2 p.m. This public meeting is now closed.